American fans been wanting a men's champion for a long time, and I feel like I let a lot of people down.
Losing sucks, but it definitely hurts a little bit more when you knew you never really stood a chance. 6 different American men have come close to winning a slam in the last decade, but were they really that close? And looking at Taylor Fritz as the latest example, what was the handwriting on the wall regarding his title ambitions, and how could he be so close yet so far from achieving his dream? To get the full picture behind Fritz's loss, we first need to study the American trend that has played out over the last decade. Roddick's painful defeat to Federer at the 2009 Wimbledon final was talked about for years, because if he had won that match, it could have taken 6 years away from the title drought, and it wouldn't have been this bad. The 2009 final was a rematch of the 2004 and 2005 finals. The match lasted 77 games, which was a record, with the last set being the longest 5th set in major men's singles final history. Roddick was breaths away from a 2-sets-to-love lead and held multiple set points, but this happened.
No, he's put it out. Federer is still in this set and in the match.
And Federer went on to win the championship.
And the Wimbledon men's singles champion for 2009, Roger Federer.
The next American who came closest was Sam Querrey. Sam Querrey showed up in 2017 at Wimbledon and was 2 sets away from the final. He had taken the first set against Marin Cilic in the semis, but ended up losing a tight 4-setter to shatter all hope once again. So close, yet so far. He probably wouldn't have beaten 2017 Federer at Wimbledon in the final, but whatever. Same time, same venue the following year, but a different man. John Isner was hoping to serve his way to the title at the All England Club. After all, he had just won the Miami Open that year and was a top 10 player, so I said to myself, this is possible. But guess what? Isner lost the semis to Kevin Anderson in 6 hours and 36 minutes. I mean, just take a look at the scoreline. It was so close, but Isner just couldn't get over the hump, and it sucked for the Americans once again.
I was, pretty close to making a Grand Slam final, and it didn't happen, so.
We switched focus to Frances Tiafoe at the 2022 US Open. Big Foe took down Nadal before beating Rublev in straight sets in the quarterfinal. He had his chances against Alcaraz in the semis, but then ran out of steam in the 5th set.
The second teenager in the Open era to reach the US Open final.
I feel like I let you guys down. This one really hurts. This one really, really hurts.
You didn't let anybody down, believe me.
This one sucked because Tiafoe would have liked his chances against Ruud. No disrespect though. The fact that Tiafoe was 1 set away from becoming the first American to reach the US Open final since 2006 left a bitter taste. But not for too long though. Thanks to another American, we dared to dream again at the very next slam. This time, it was in Australia. Tommy Paul took advantage of a wide open draw and made it to the semis, but then lost to Djokovic in straight sets. Not sure anyone felt too bad about this one.
Yeah, he's gonna make good of it.
Novak Djokovic looking to continue his quest.
When the 2023 US Open came around, a new face was present. Ben Shelton hung up the phone on everyone before running into Djokovic in the semis. Taking Djokovic out of the picture because he's goated, what went wrong in the other attempts? Were the opponents simply better? Did the Americans run out of luck? Or was it down to something else? I don't know the answer, but what I do know is what Jannik Sinner did to Fritz on September 8th, 2024 is a perfect example of what can happen when talent meets hard work. Now, don't get me wrong, for you to be a top 10 player like Fritz, you're already super talented. But there are levels to this. You might have done everything right, but sometimes effort alone just doesn't cut it. You see, Fritz has always worked his socks off right from the get-go. His parents were pro tennis players who wanted him to continue their legacy, so he started really early as a kid. By the time Fritz became the junior world champion in 2015, Sinner, who's about 4 years younger, wasn't even on the radar as a late starter. The Italian, more focused on skiing and soccer, wasn't really into tennis until he turned 13. While Sinner was still learning the ropes, Fritz was already being celebrated in the States as the first American junior in 10 years to become #1 since Donald Young in 2005. Fast forward to 2021, Fritz had now become the top American, but Sinner had now overtaken him by breaking into the top 10 and winning many more titles while still not done with his physical development. Fritz did win the biggest trophy of his life at Indian Wells in 2022 and also cracked the top 10, but just became an absolute beast from the second half of last year. Now you might ask me, Noah, why are you putting their trajectories side by side? Fritz grew up with a lot of expectations over the years. He had always been seen as the poster boy and the next big thing for American tennis, and he had to overcome many obstacles along the way. But at the same time, there seemed to be a limit on his talent. He wasn't born an elite mover, he wasn't gifted with natural athletic capabilities like some of the other players, but despite his limitations, Fritz became the first American to crack the top 5 since Andy Roddick, the first one in years to reach the semis in Monte Carlo and Madrid, the first American to reach the second week of every slam in the same season since Agassi in 2001. While there were no questions about Fritz's work ethic and discipline, there were a lot of question marks about his talent. His movement, net play, volleys, forehand, and backhand slice were all seen as average at best. This led to further doubts about his ceiling as a top player. Fritz's first Grand Slam quarterfinal was in 2022 at Wimbledon against Rafa. Rafa was injured, his serve was severely compromised, but somehow Fritz couldn't quite take advantage. What if Fritz managed to get over the line in that quarterfinal? He would have faced Kyrgios in the semis, and being the higher-ranked opponent, he would have been the favorite on paper. Fritz's next 2 quarterfinal appearances were against Novak, and he really didn't stand a chance at the 2023 US Open and 2024 Australian Open. But against Musetti at Wimbledon, Musetti's variety with the slice, drop shots, and during the baseline rallies wore Fritz down, and he just ran out of gas in the 5th set. Those quarterfinals against Nadal and Musetti were the closest Fritz had ever come to winning a slam. Until now. You see, Fritz didn't shy away from the pressure he had to deal with. He continued to work on his game. The movement got better, the volleys improved, the ground strokes became more solid, and he finally reached the first Grand Slam final of his career. He was as close as it gets. On Sunday, September 8th, 2024, Taylor Fritz was 3 sets away from a US Open title, and boy was he on a mission. But did he really stand a chance though? Getting to the final boss often isn't the problem, but beating him is. And the first thing to look at going into the big match is the psychological aspect. Every athlete has a routine before the big match. For someone like Rafael Nadal, who's an extreme example in this case, he's an intimidating presence in the locker room and is sometimes all over the place with his unique rituals. Essentially, every player does what works for them, and whatever you do doesn't actually guarantee you'll win or lose a match. But sometimes, you wonder how routines could sometimes be crucial to someone's psychological success over an opponent.
I'm playing Nadal in Roland Garros, and I have his locker next to my locker, right? So we are so close, and we're trying to give each other space, but then locker room is also not that big. And the way you jump around like Nadal does before we go out on the court, in the locker room, he's doing sprints next to you. I can even hear the music he's listening to, in his headphones. So, it's pissing me off. I didn't realize how all that's part of the scenario, right? So I was getting intimidated by that.
Taylor's pre-match warm-up was the usual, focused on lateral movement, quick steps, and some stretches. During the coin toss, Sinner was the more animated one at the net.
For your towels, Yannick, you can use the red one.
This should be a grand and ferocious fight.
This goes without saying, but none of this actually matters much when you have the game to beat anyone. After all, someone like Federer didn't do too much, or let alone grunt, before absolutely humiliating you. However, when playing the biggest match of your career as an underdog, doing everything possible to have a psychological edge might be something to consider. Playing in Arthur Ashe, the biggest stadium with the capacity of almost 24,000 people, in front of an American crowd filled with celebrities, and with millions of people backing him on TV, it was a legacy-defining moment for Fritz. Fritz said he wasn't as nervous in the final as he was in the semis.
I didn't feel anywhere near as nervous going into this match as I did in the semis.
Maybe that's a bad thing, because although players handle nerves differently, Fritz played incredibly well in the semis with those nerves, and it sometimes seemed that he lacked a sense of urgency in the first 2 sets against Sinner. Of course, the psychological thing we talked about wasn't the problem, really. The main problem was that Fritz just happened to run into a better player, a better athlete, returner, a better baseline player, and a player full of confidence, having the best season of his life, no less. It was mission impossible. A total of 92 baseline points were played in that final. Sinner won 60 of them, and Fritz, you can do the math, only 32. Sinner was literally twice as good as Fritz from the back of the court, as Fritz struggled to bring his forehand into play early in points. What makes this even crazier is before the final, Fritz had almost won 50% of baseline points, but was limited to a measly 34% in the final. This is how well Sinner's other opponents fared from the baseline. Taylor Fritz had 34%. Jack Draper, a step up, was at 37.6%. Daniil Medvedev at 40%. Tommy Paul at 38.6%. Chris O'Connell at 35.8%. Alex Mickelson at 44.6%. And Mackenzie McDonald at 39.8%. Now, this averages out to 38.6% overall. Looking at the forehand and backhand performance, Sinner had the more superior winner to unforced error ratio too. Taking a look at the forehand performance, Sinner had 12 winners to 26 errors, for a -14 differential. Fritz had 10 winners to 39 errors, a -29 differential. On the backhand wing, it was more of the same. Sinner had 2 winners to 16 errors, or a -14 differential, and Fritz had 3 winners to 27 errors, a -24 mark. As the rallies got longer, Sinner was more often than not the one coming up with that extra shot, which was largely helped by him being the better mover. Sinner had that ability to slide into balls perfectly and counter Fritz with a lot of depth from the corners. Meanwhile, Fritz couldn't do much once he was dragged out wide. He rarely got back into the rallies. On top of the pace, depth, and weight of shot that Sinner was bringing to the table, he handpicked his moments to inject a lot of pace into rallies to finish Fritz off. But it wasn't just about the baseline exchange. There was also a lack of variety from Fritz. And when it came to the serve, Fritz grossly underperformed in that department in the early sets, and when he bumped up his first serve in the second set, it was met with some tactical adjustment on the return position from Sinner. Here's what I mean. Midway through the match, Sinner moved back from the baseline to return and varied the height on the ground strokes, sometimes hitting back loopy balls, knowing Fritz couldn't finish off the points. And the more Sinner extended the rallies, the worse it got for Fritz. Coming into the match, Sinner ticked all the boxes, and Fritz's main weapon was supposed to be his serve, the crowd, and a mysterious trick up his sleeve, which could be anything, really. But he ended up not maximizing any of those things. Regarding the crowd, Fritz is never the one to work an audience like Tiafoe or Shelton, and he couldn't create tension on the scoreboard often enough to keep the Arthur Ashe crowd fully engaged. Also, Sinner isn't the most emotionally expressive guy on tour, so he also doesn't give the crowd anything to use against him. Overall, the match lasted just over 2 hours, and just like that, American hopes were smashed to pieces once again. As Sinner went into the stands to celebrate with his support team after the match, we saw Fritz slumped in his chair with his hands on his head, thinking about what could have been. For all the struggles, trials, and tribulations, did he just pass up on what could have been his best chance at a major? There was quite enough interest in a potential American win. After the match, Fritz had this to say on the court.
I know we've been waiting for a champion for a long time, so I'm sorry I couldn't get it done this time, but I'm going to keep working and hopefully I'll get it done next time, so thank you.
I couldn't help but feel a little emotional hearing those words from Fritz. But what hurts the most is knowing that Fritz didn't give it his best shot.
I'm pretty just disappointed in how I played, how I hit certain shots. It sucks, and I'm not saying like that it necessarily would have made a difference. I don't know if it would have, but I just would have liked to play it better and given myself a better chance. So it's really disappointing right now.
Really, it's just more satisfying to know that you lost despite giving it your all. Anything less than that sucks. But enough of the sulking, let's give credit where it's due. Fritz has been in form for most of the year. He won tournaments in Delray Beach and Eastbourne, made his first appearances in the quarterfinals of the Australian Open in Wimbledon, made deep runs at the Masters 1000 tournaments on clay, teamed up with Tommy Paul to take the bronze in doubles, and now a maiden Grand Slam final appearance. Oh, and by the way, Fritz took down 3 guys with a combined 6 runner-up finishes at Grand Slams. Casper Ruud, a 3-time finalist, Zverev, a 2-time finalist, and Berrettini, the 2021 Wimbledon finalist, en route to the final. At this point, it doesn't matter if he benefited from a wide-open draw in the bottom half, because you can only beat who's in front of you. Being the first American in a Grand Slam final since 2009 is also something we won't forget in a hurry. I think it's safe to say that Fritz is also one of the few American players to be good, or at the very least, decent on every surface. Being one of the very first players I did a deep dive on, I've always been a huge admirer of his work ethic, determination, and resilience. Looking back at that video, it's clear that he's worked on so many things that we've talked about since then. In a way, he reminds me of the other elite players like Alex de Minaur and Medvedev, who, going by the traditional definition of talent, are not often seen as talented as the others. yet they still managed to do great things on the court. Taylor turns 27 soon, and if there's any American you can bank on to consistently make deep runs at slams, it's Fritz. And my guess is with enough darts on the board, he's eventually going to hit the bullseye. It has to happen at some point, right? Back in 2003, when Roddick won the US Open in front of the home crowd, it looked like he was going to pick up from right where Sampras, Agassi, and Courier left off, but Roddick was unfortunate to meet Roger Federer in all 4 of the next Grand Slam finals he reached. And I have to say, no one has really come close since then. Sometimes it just looks like we have a bunch of Americans who will always be top seeds, but not really in the conversation for Slam titles. Currently, 5 men are in the top 20, by far the most out of any nation. Fritz, Tommy Paul, Korda, Tiafoe, and Shelton. The drought hasn't been for a lack of star power, and it's also not because there's a lack of national support. The United States is a great place to learn tennis, and the USTA, although not 100% perfect, remains one of the best tennis associations in the world. And by the way, the women are doing great too. Going down to junior tennis, currently there are 14 Americans inside the top 100 in juniors, which again is probably the highest out of any nation. Seeing a truckload of talent on the junior circuit, you sometimes ask yourself if the European systems help juniors transition better to pro tennis. It seems to be the case in my opinion. But circling back to the men, it just so happens to be that a certain group of players called the Big Three literally stopped everyone else from winning the biggest trophy for over 2 decades. 79 of the last 80 slams have been won by Europeans, the only exception being Juan Martín del Potro in 2009. Now that the Big Three era is over, there's a new sheriff in town called the Big Two, Sinner and Alcaraz. How can Fritz, Paul, Korda, Big Foe, and Shelton get past the European roadblock from Sinner and Alcaraz? Well, you can't stop the waves from coming in, but you can learn how to surf. In this case, you can't stop Sinner from being the freak that he is from the baseline, but you can pray that he has tonsillitis or something. Now, if your prayers don't get answered, you'd have to play your best tennis and then go out on your shield. And if you manage to avoid Sinner and Alcaraz en route to the final, you'd better count yourself as the luckiest man in the 21st century. The last step is often the hardest. Many people can get to the final boss, but that doesn't mean you're ready to beat them. For all of his hard work and improvement in all aspects of the game, Fritz was still not ready to beat Sinner. Although being in the final made it look like he had a 50% chance, in reality, he wasn't really close. Who knows? Maybe this loss was what Fritz needed to wake up the beast in him. Maybe the lessons learned from the 2024 Men's US Open final will provide enough motivation to end the 21-year drought. Fritz was so close to winning, yet so far. I'm rooting for him and the other guys. One thing is for sure, I'm super excited to see what next year has in store for us. What are your predictions for the upcoming Grand Slam season? Be sure to let me know in the comments.